Hi, this is Tim from Tiger Astronomy, and this is a quick how-to video on how to install and use the NexDome ASCOM server and the associated firmware. Okay, so if we take a look at the download first of all, you can see here there are actually two alpha releases now. Now this one, alpha 35, is the one you should be using, and I've only just uploaded that a few minutes ago. So you probably won't have that, so please check you are using at least alpha 35. Okay, so I'm going to open that zip file up, and inside that are three items, which are the instructions for alpha testers, which I highly recommend you read, because we define in there exactly what we mean by an alpha release and the consequences of that, and you really should understand all the consequences of using alpha software before you proceed. So in the ASCOM folder is the actual ASCOM server and driver, and in the firmware folder is the pre-compiled firmware and a utility for uploading it to your NexDome hardware. So obviously you need your hardware connected via USB connectors, and if I look in Device Manager here, you can see under ports I've got two Arduinos here showing up, which is COM3, which is my rotator, and COM12, which is my shutter. And you need to know which is which, because you're going to upload different firmware to each one. And okay, so I'm going to copy these folders out of the zip file, and I'm going to create a new folder under my user home directory, and I'm just going to call that NexDome Alpha, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to paste the contents of the zip file, and that will take just a moment to unzip. But while that's happening, I'm going to load up PowerShell, Windows PowerShell. I have it pinned to my taskbar with a nice big font and everything, so we can see what's going on. If you don't see it in your taskbar, you can just pop it in that search box there and it'll come up and you can start it from there. Okay, so I'm going to change directory to the NexDome Alpha directory that I just created. Oh, okay, we can come out of that. And there are our items. Now, first of all, we're concerned with the firmware, because the first thing we need to do is get the updated firmware onto our systems, and this firmware is not backward compatible, so it's a match set with the new ASCOM driver. So change directory firmware, and just, I don't know if you see what I did there, but this is a really useful tip with PowerShell. Change directory is the command, and then I want to go into the firmware directory, so I just type F and then hit tab, and it does completion for me. Okay, so if you see things popping up really quick, I'm just hitting tab. So in that firmware folder are two other folders. Now this one here contains the actual pre-compiled firmware, and this one here contains the uploader utility. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say from the uploader utility, and I've hit tab there and it's taking a while to complete, and I'm just going to put in here star.exe and hit tab, and that is the updater utility, and then double dash port name, and my rotator port is COM3, and then double dash hex file, and then we're going to go down into this firmware directory and look for a hex file, and there we go, rotator.hex, ta.nexdome.rotator.hex. so this command line takes the hex file in that long path there and sends it to the Arduino that's connected to COM port 3. So when I press enter, the Arduino goes through a little dance, and you can see, oh, that's interesting. That's really unusual. It doesn't normally fail. Let's try that again. Okay, I remember this. The AVR Dude programmer that comes with Arduino doesn't like paths with spaces in. Okay, and as you can see, I've got a space in this path, NexDome space alpha. So what we need to do is, okay, rename NexDome alpha, NexDome dash alpha. That should work fine. Okay, NexDome alpha. Okay, and right, so that's really important. Make sure you've got no spaces or special characters in your path, in your entire path name, right from the drive letter here all the way through. There mustn't be any spaces. Hyphens and underscores are okay, we know that, but probably nothing else. Okay, so back into the firmware directory, and okay, so I'm going to recall that command line, and that should work now, right? So let's try that. Okay, now because of the way the Arduino Leonardo works, it actually pops up on a different COM port, and as you can see now, firmware update successful. That's really important that you see that message, otherwise it hasn't worked. Like for example here, it failed. So you've got to see this or it hasn't worked. Okay, and then I'm going to use that same command again, except I'm going to use the port that my shutter's connected to. So this is going to be COM12, and the hex file is going to be, instead of rotator.hex, it's going to be shutter.hex, and away we go. Okay, so that's our firmware updated. Now, this step is optional, but if you wanted to check that worked, you could get a terminal emulator up, and I use Putty, but there are lots of others available. Connect to your rotator. So in my case, you can see that's COM3 at 115/200 bits per second. Okay, and when you open that, you'll see these diagnostic messages coming out. Actually, this is telling us that the XB wireless link is starting up and being configured. So I'm going to type at FRR, which stands for Firmware Read Rotator. Okay, and that is the current firmware build we're on. It's a bit of an odd one, that, but not to worry. It just means it's an integration build. Okay, we're online. The shutter popped in. So that thing that got spat out there was the battery voltage value. It's not, you can't read it as a direct voltage reading. It's actually in analog to digital units. But nevertheless, that says that the battery voltage is there. So now we can do at firmware read shutter, and the same, hopefully the same version as you saw above comes back for the shutter as well, and that actually came back across the wireless link. So that tells us that the wireless link is up and running and everything's working. So as I said, that step was completely optional. We will close that down, and now we need to look at the ASCOM server. So I'm going to go cd ... up to the parent directory, and then I'm going to cd ASCOM. Okay, and in here are all the files that make up the ASCOM driver, but again, the one we're interested in is the star.exe file. Okay, so I've just pressed tab there to complete that, and we need to register the ASCOM driver before we use it for the first time. So we just put space and / register, and then there'll be a slight pause, and then you'll get a request for elevated permissions because it's trying to get administrator rights to write to the registry, and that creates all the COM interop registrations and the ASCOM chooser registration. Okay, so at that point you can take your favorite ASCOM compatible program, and I happen to have Maxim DL6 here, so I'll just use that. Okay, and open up the observatory window in Maxim, and under the dome here I'm going to pull out the chooser, and in the chooser, in the ASCOM chooser, you should now see NexDome listed. And if you click Properties, that should bring up the setup dialog. And for some reason, the setup dialog sometimes opens behind the other windows. You can see there it is actually opened. But if you just use Alt-Tab, then you can switch through your other windows and bring it to the front. Okay, now don't worry about this bottom half. This is just to do with timeouts and is work in progress. That's probably going to disappear by the final version. But all you're worried about right now is the COM port here at the top. And this drop-down box will only list COM ports that are available on the system. You need to select your rotator port, so that's COM3 in my case, and then OK, and that is fully configured. OK again, and then in Maxim I can go to the Dome entry here and click Connect, and that will go ahead and connect to the Dome driver. Now that will open a little user interface, which again doesn't always show up on top of the other windows. So if you just Alt-Tab, you'll see it lurking, and that's what the user interface looks like. Okay, so we're seeing here some status for the rotator and the shutter, and here we have the battery voltage, which in my case is looking rather low and therefore it's in warning state. This bar here shows you the shutter position, so that's currently fully, well, it says open, but the bar actually says it's closed, so that may be a bug. And the bottom bar here is the battery voltage, so as you can see it's looking, the minimum here is 10 volts, the maximum is 15 volts, and your battery, if it gets to 10 volts, that's well flat, so you should have closed by that point. So this is good, right? So in Maxim, we can go into the Dome control panel here now, and we can just pick an azimuth. We tell it to go to 30 degrees, click Go To, and away it goes. I don't know if you can hear that. That's my test bed wearing away there, and the animation in Maxim is updating. And of course, if you've got a real dome, you're luckier than me, and your dome will turn at that point. So that's about as far as I want to show you. If you need to go back to your old firmware at any point, then you will need to use the XB factory reset firmware to achieve that, because the new firmware configures the XBs differently, and then the old firmware isn't able to deal with that situation. So you have to kind of revert to factory defaults, and then the old firmware will be able to deal with it. Okay, so hopefully you won't need to, because I think this should be far enough along that it might actually be usable now, although it is still in alpha quality, so we're not actually feature complete yet, so there will be things missing. Please do bear that in mind when you're trying it out. If you find any problems, then I'd be very grateful if you would put them into the issue tracker. And that is on Bitbucket, and there is a link to it in the documentation. Okay, so if you remember that PDF file that was in the zip file, here we go, instructions for alpha testers. If we open that up, in that file is a link to the issue tracker, and you do have to have a login. You have to be logged in to create an issue. You cannot post anonymously. And I know that's a little bit inconvenient, but what we found is that when people post anonymously, we almost invariably need to follow up with them to get more information. And if it's anonymous, we can't, and then therefore that's just a big waste of time for us and for the user who doesn't get their issue fixed. So we've disabled the option to post anonymously, and I'm sorry it does take you just another couple of minutes to create a user account on Bitbucket, but it's for the best in the long run, and I hope you'll understand that. Okay, I've been Tim from Tiger Astronomy. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have luck with the driver.